I think they'll just stay up
Okay.
there if that's okay.
All
I'll
right.
introduce them.
Go ahead and introduce yourself, Greg.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Greg Sheehan. I'm the director with Utah Division of Wildlife Resources. I feel like this is the big time. There's people up there, too, if you didn't know that down below. I can't see how many, but they're definitely up there. I appreciate Ron and Randy asking me to come participate in this conference today. We'll try to talk about some wildlife things. I know all of you here are pretty familiar with the wildlife world, but maybe we can share a few new thoughts or ideas. I did want to mention quickly some of the folks that are in attendance today. We have 6 voting board members on the Utah Wildlife Board. 3 of those are here today: Byron Bateman, Donnie Hunter, and Steve Dalton. And I could tell you with each of these guys, you know, a lot of people think that these are boards that sit up in Salt Lake or whatever and don't really have a good feel or touch of the landscapes. But they very much do. All of these guys have been out on the ground. Some of them, you know, Steve Dalton's been a rancher here in southern Utah for 30 years, or longer than that, I think. Byron's been integrally involved with solving wildlife situations and challenges around the state, as has Donnie. Calvin Crandall, with Utah Cattlemen, cattle rancher himself up north of here a ways, was also on the board. So these are people that hear and understand you, and as we talk about these public processes, you need to keep in mind that they do have an open ear, rather than feeling like, well, why should I engage in a public process that really doesn't hear what I have to say. So I've also got Bill Bates here. He's our wildlife section chief. Kobe Jones is our new private lands public wildlife coordinator, and Kevin Bunnell, our southern region wildlife regional manager here. So anyway, let's take a few minutes and jump into this. Somewhere there's a gadget here to advance slides. What I wanted to talk about, I'm going to grab this other mic. It's hard for me to see what's going on behind me here. So we'll do that a little bit. And I understand there's lunch at noon. We will be done by noon. And again, I want to thank the Farm Bureau and all the sponsors and partners today who helped provide that for all of you who were able to travel here for this important conference today. I'm going to just talk briefly about where we share common interests, where and how we're addressing concerns, and how we can work together moving forward. The first one, where we share common interests. I was up at the state capitol last week, and Randy and I ran into each other up there, and I sat down for a few minutes. I said, what's the message that you'd like me to share today? You know, how, you know, everybody's certainly aware of wildlife and how that interacts here on our landscapes. But he said, let's start talking about what we have in common. You know, you've heard all of the speakers this morning say, we've got to bond together. You know, there's a lot of forces out in the world right now that want to change our world, and if we don't first find that common ground, it's pretty hard to move forward. So let's talk about that. Kathleen talked about politics earlier and how important that is, and Reg alluded a few moments ago to that as well, sort of this commonality. So I want to take a moment and share a little story. How many of you here saw the movie The Hunger Games? Anybody here in the audience? Let me tell you what that's about. That's a book and a movie. It came out a couple years ago. And essentially it's sort of a modernistic world where most of the people have moved into the big cities, the urban areas. And the folks left behind are those people who provide the natural resources to these folks who live in the city. And they have them in districts, if you will. There's a district that does logging, and there's a district that does mining, and there's a district that does farming, and there's one that delivers the water to these cities. And these people are out in these rural areas, and they really don't have much. You know, they're not living in the greatest conditions. And in order to sort of ensure that there's this allegiance by these districts, if you will, to these big cities, they have a contest every year called the Hunger Games, and they go take 2 teenage kids out of each of these different districts, and they bring them to sit in, they put them in kind of a big forested arena, and they have, it's a bit grisly, but they have a fight to the death of all these kids, and whichever one of these prevails, of these 13 districts as kind of the champion that year of the Hunger Games. And the purpose of that, that they do that, is they create this rivalry between these districts that are out there, the forest people and the mining people and all of that, to keep that division away from them so they won't align themselves to one another. And then their only allegiance really can be to the folks in the city. It's really the only contact they have or that they want to have. Ultimately, as this progressed forward, you had kind of the star of this. She shoots a bow and arrow. Maybe you've seen that because they've taken the guns and things away from these folks in the districts. But ultimately, they push back and say, we'd rather bond together. We have a lot in common together rather than just only this allegiance to the city. So that didn't end well, and certainly we want this to end well, but there was kind of an unfortunate pushback, and that's exactly what we don't want to happen. But the point is, there's this division of these folks who provide and the natural resources. So I've got a map up here. This is the 2012 presidential race by county, all right? And you can kind of see it looks pretty red. Obviously, the red was where the Republicans fell out, and the blue would be the Democratic world. Some of these areas, whoops, go back a notch here. Some of these areas are larger counties and have a lot of tribal ground and things down in New Mexico and Arizona. But I think you're all pretty familiar with what this may look like. And I'll be honest with you, I believe that this presidential election, no matter who wins, Republican or Democrat, will look a lot like this. I don't think you're going to see a whole lot of change to this presidential cycle. But here's what's important to know. I've highlighted the areas here that are where the masses of population and electoral votes are in this country. These are the people. It's kind of that Portland, Seattle area, the western coast of California, Denver, Phoenix, Dallas, Miami, the Northeast, and Chicago area. These are the people that are setting policy in this country because these are where the electoral votes have. California has more electoral votes than all of these states here put together. They have 55 electoral votes in California. Utah has 4, Idaho has 3, Wyoming has 3. Very few votes that occur in all these states. But because they have the votes, they control Congress, and Congress controls the policy that we heard so much about today. Who's making the rule book on these public lands? Now, my next slide is, this is where the majority of natural resources in this country are produced, kind of in that core American zone, if you will. And some of those resources would be your timber, your mining. We view, and I'm with Wildlife Resources, we view wildlife as a natural resource that we have available. Ranching, farming, manufacturing, some back here in this area. But this is where a lot of these different areas come from. And these are areas where we have to continue to have that commonality and that bonding like Red's just talked about, where we've got to work together. If you do an overlay of the two, okay, where the people that are the voters, where the votes come from, and hence the congressional folks, you can see there's very little overlap in those two. And so most of the people in the country don't really live in and have a close connection to these natural resources that we provide here. And that's unfortunate, but it's still a reality. Some of these areas, I look at this greater Chicago area, manufacturing, where a lot of that industry has been lost, quite honestly, over the years. And you see, a whole lot of that sort of shift, if you will, that may represent, and some folks, maybe individuals who maybe are looking for more to get help from the government. A lot of what they had has been lost. So, but I think to add one more slide on here on top of this, this yellow area I've highlighted is kind of our public lands, more or less. Now, all of these things I mentioned could occur in almost any of those states, and there's public land everywhere, but it's hard for me to kind of draw circles and nail everything. But this area here is kind of the public lands that preside in this country, in the lower 48 states. Of course, Alaska has a lot. But within that circle, here we are together. We sort of are this brotherhood of folks who we really don't have any significant congressional voting behind us. We, with all due respect to our congressmen that are here, I saw Casey and a few others, and we appreciate you, but but as they well know, it's tough to control the day when you don't have a lot of the votes there. But here we are. We've got timber. It's been affected by spotted owls. We've got mining that's, you've seen what's happened with coal, and some of the more recent executive orders out of the president shutting that down. Oil and gas, going after fracking or tougher environmental regulations. Wildlife, we are constantly battling endangered species issues, ranching, and you're all here today and understand those challenges as well. So my point of these slides is we're all kind of brothers, if you will, out in this part of the United States, and we've got to bond together, because even though any one of us individually, as Reg said earlier, we have our issues, we know what our beliefs are, we know why we're sure we're the right ones. But if we got people out in these other areas understanding sort of our issues and our plight of what we're doing with. So what I want to talk about today in this brief hour that we have, or less than an hour, is what can we do to work to find those common areas and try to help influence the people that live in these other shaded areas, because ultimately, we're not going to be able to change who and where people are voting in this country. That one's probably out of our control. But a shared message that we can bring together may begin to move the body of those people. So what do those people think out there? What do those individual citizens in those shaded areas in the bigger city and urban areas, what do they think about us? Is this a statement that they may have a belief of out there because of the, maybe a liberal media that's pushed that? Fracking for oil and gas is destroying water quality and it's unsafe. Genetically modified crops are unhealthy. Cloned livestock will hurt mankind as well as the animals being cloned. America's declining wild horses are sort of our Western heritage that's going away, because these horses are obviously all going away. Hunters have killed most of the wild animals. Is there really anything left out there? People believe that in these cities, that there's just not much left. The hunters are killing everything. Wolves are just about extinct. And we need to get those everywhere we can, because there really aren't any wolves left. We've seen that in the news. Fires are evil and destroy our forests. Been reading the Dr. Seuss books. When all the trees are gone, it's a bad world to live in. Logging is bad practice, because there won't be any trees remaining for us to enjoy. And the public lands have all been destroyed. These are some of the kinds of views, and you could probably think of others. These are just a short list that I came up with of how I believe that the people in those areas perceive what's going on in our country, where we provide natural resources, where we have these public lands. And because those are the thought processes, they're also helping fund NGOs that we've talked about a little bit today, that are taking and channeling those dollars to force issues on wild horses and burros, or some of the groups I deal with, the Wild Earth Guardians and Center for Biological Diversity and Defenders of Wildlife, who are constantly, Humane Society of the U.S., these are groups that are constantly bombarding what we're trying to do as a state wildlife agency as we move forward. So what is some of this common ground that we have? We need to work together as partners to bring about a better set of policies through organized channels and education. We've got to do this right. As much as this Bundy incident that Director Kathleen Clark mentioned a few moments ago showed the passion of those folks, it probably, as Randy said, didn't necessarily endear us to that cause, because there is a cause there, but those people in those little shaded areas probably weren't able to decipher what that was through this. Our landscapes evolved with grazing. We know that, okay? Grazing has been here long before man was even here on these landscapes, Be that, maybe it was back then, elk and bison and bighorn sheep, but some of those species are gone forever. We aren't going to have bison grazing in the Sanpete Valley here anytime soon, or we never will. So, but nevertheless, these plant communities evolved with grazing. These are natural processes that need to continue on. Our hunters and anglers and hunting guides are rural Utah. Some people want to say there's hunters and there's ranchers. I'll bet there's not a person in this family who isn't been a hunter at some point in their life, or an angler. Most of you, I think, still are today, or certainly your families are. This is a part of your culture. We have over 400 licensed hunting guides to guide on public lands in Utah, most of those in southern Utah. These people live in these communities, and I'm sure if I did a show of hands, there's some folks in here who are licensed guides for hunting, because it's part of the way you help build retain your families on these landscapes. You're doing ranching, and you've got spouses that are teachers or nurses or work for government agencies, and some of you do guiding as well. That is a resource on these landscapes. We share in common. We don't want these rural landscapes subdivided either. That's not any better for wildlife than it is for grazing. Predator control. We continue to through our Division of Wildlife, we do bounties. We give a considerable amount of money to wildlife services here in the state. I don't know if Mike Linnell's here somewhere, but we're a financial partner there. We do contracts for predator control. The wolf fight. We absolutely do not believe in the state of Utah that there's room for one single wolf in this state unless we have state management authority over that. No tolerance for that. If the feds want to give us authority over the northern wolf, we'll have a discussion. And there should not be any Mexican wolves at all in this state. And we will continue to fight that fight. Endangered Species Act reform. We all need that change. That's hurting us in many ways. And the seems to be the up and coming rage right now in that world by this environmental community is to go after plants. We've all been dealing with the prairie dogs and all these different species over the years, but now plants are coming about as a new way that these folks are going to try to get after us. And so we need to get these laws reformed. And there are good ways to reform the Endangered Species Act that'll still be a good law and protect our wildlife and landscapes. But right now there's a lot of provisions in there that need some work. Watershed Restoration Initiative projects. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. Wild horse management, that's an area that we're concerned about. Many of you on some of these areas, particularly in southern Utah here, have really felt the impact of these wild horses on your private lands, on your public lands. It's a challenge. We just flew for elk. We had some commissioners here that flew elk with us the other day, out on the West Desert here, in an area with an objective of 600 horses, just where we were flying our elk to count our elk. So we didn't cover every inch of that unit, but just where we were covering that, we counted 1,800 horses on that. We had some of the county commissioners here that did those flights with us. So that's a lot. That's a problem. And I know Jenna here, director with Utah BLM, is concerned about that too. I think she's like, yeah, we hear you there, but somehow that's a common area that we've got to work through. We believe the state management authority on all wildlife. Right now we've got challenges, with and I know we've got some Forest Service folks here as well, but bighorn sheep has been a challenge for us. We believe we've been doing that right in the Uintas, and now that's caused some problems for some of the grazers up there. This is our authority. Mountain goats. There's environmental groups suing the Forest Service because we put mountain goats on the LaSalle Mountain Range. We did that because we're trying to avoid conflicts with domestic sheep grazing down there, which we've done, but there's an environmental community suing them to tell them to get our wild mountain goats off the mountain. Last one, I've got a radical environmental community that hates what we do. I can say that because if any of you want to see some of the emails that I get, I could tell you they hate what we do, and these are not nice. These are a lot of times, threatening because we hunt cougars with hound dogs, and because we, just a lot of what we do, there's a perception it's from urban Utah, it's from rural Utah, it's from throughout the United States, and it's from all around the world. I'm a little bit less worried about the emails I get from Britain and Africa and places, but I can tell you, these people have money, a lot of them, and they push that money towards these NGOs, and these NGOs push litigation. They push lawsuits, and they push things that take away our resources, and they take away the federal partners in the room, and take away their resources to be able to do what they want to do as we try to fight these things. I'm going to take just a short moment, since they gave me some time today, and introduce a good friend of mine, Senator Tom Hatch, who I think many of you know, and give him a moment or two of this time block. But I want to tell you, as he comes up, about Tom. I known Tom for quite a number of years. In 2003, he and I were hunting together in Wyoming, Sheridan, Wyoming, deer hunting, and he was in the legislature at the time, And Mike Styler was a legislator at the time as well. And we're bouncing around on a dirt road over there, and they said, why don't we come up with some state funding to go start restoring these landscapes here in Utah? And they came up with, they said, let's do $2 million. And Mike Styler was on the Executive Appropriations Committee at the time, and Tom was the chair of the Natural Resources Committee, and they came up with it. And then they said, we need sportsmen to kick in. They said, you know, what can sportsmen do? We committed $3 million a year to that. And then we continued to go out to these communities. The BLM and Forest Service brought millions to the table, and we built this watershed restoration initiative. You don't have to drive around too much around Utah to see the work we've done. It's been over 1 million acres, $140 million now, combination of state, private, federal funds that we've worked together. But that's the kind of partnerships that we need to continue to work to build forward. But during that time, Kathleen Clark was the director of the BLM, who's sitting down here. And they went back to her and they said, how can the BLM formally help? We said, if we're going to start restoring wildfires that happen or some of these native rangelands, it's going to cost a lot of money. We're going to need a lot of seed. We're going to need a lot of equipment. Kathleen was the director of BLM in Washington. She said, what do you need? Boom, $2 million to build a new building that's about a half hour north of here up in Ephraim. And right there, out of there, we now treat hundreds of thousands of acres of ground, and those are great partnerships. But I'm going to turn this over to Tom. Tom was also the vice chair of the Utah Wildlife Board a number of years ago, and as I mentioned earlier, a senator and a good friend. So here you go, Tom.
Thank you, Greg. You know, it's been quite some time since I've participated in a forum of this type. I've kind of dropped out of the political scene in the last 10 years and tried to do some other things in my life. But it's great to be here with you today. I appreciated Greg. He called me the other day. I was actually on the golf course when he called and asked me if I'd come and take just a few minutes. He said he had an hour to take up on talking about wildlife and partnerships, and he thought that maybe I could say something that would bring the two communities, the ranching community and the livestock industry and the sportsmen together, having the background that I did. I've got to tell you though, you know, it's I'm getting older, and I really noticed that the other day as I told one of my grandsons. I says, you know, this old age just isn't what it built up to be. And he said, Grandpa, don't worry, it doesn't last very long. So I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But you know, I've been involved in public land issues really for the past 50 years. As I was thinking last night, and many of the same discussions that I sat here by Mr. Morgan, and I said, I'm hearing things that I heard back in the 1970s. The same thing over and over again, and I don't know that we've made much discussion or made much progress. You know, as I first got involved in the public land issues, I was a young man in my early 20s, and I think I took out purchased my first grazing permit when I was 22 years old. I had a forest permit for sheep up on the Mount Dutton on the Dixie National Forest. And I just sold my last permit last year. So I'm really out of the grazing business, but it's still in the family. And it's near and dear to my heart. But I started to thinking about, you know, when all this happened, because my family, like Reg's family and many of yours, has been in the livestock business, you know, ever since they first came into these valleys in the West. And we seemed to get along pretty good up until about the mid-1960s or so in there. Things seemed to go pretty good. And then we had the passage of, I think it was in 1964, they passed the Wilderness Act. Then in the early 1970s, they passed the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, and then FLIPMA, and then, you know, a whole array, the Wild Horse and Burro Act, the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, you Endangered Species Act. They just goes on and on. And if you go back and look, many of those were passed when Republicans were in office and signed by Republican presidents. It's not so much a partisan issue as many of us would like to think that it is. And I think the people that drafted that legislation had some good ideas. You know, I'm sure when the Wilderness Act was passed in 1964, we all thought that there was areas that ought to be designated wilderness in the United States and preserved for future generations. But I think the fallacy and the problem has come as these acts have been handed down through the bureaucracy, you know, that they have, through CFRs and regulations that have been developed. The real intent of those, in many cases, I think, has followed the people that are administering them. And I heard someone say the other day, you know, that, in fact, it was Mr. Gleaves up in Paiute County. I heard him as he was making a presentation to the legislature. My son sent me a video, and he says, you know, I get along with some of my rangers very good, and others I don't. And that's been my observation over the years, both with BLM and the Forest Services. Some of them you get along with great. I don't know what the difference. They're supposed to be working for the same agency, the same manual, but it seems like they just have their own personal agendas, and that's tough to deal with. It's really tough to deal with. But I'm just kind of using the bully pulpit here to talk about some of those things. I know Greg wanted me to talk about wildlife and how we need to partner with our allies. And I've heard a lot of people that have talked this morning here talk about the importance of you know, concentrating on what we have in common and not what divides us. And that's also important, I think. As I sat on the wildlife board, I gained a new appreciation. Greg has talked, you know, about the importance of wildlife in our state. And I'm here to tell you that if we as a ranching community get into a brawl with the sportsmen of the state, we lose. Because for every grazing permittee on the Dixie National Forest or the Fish Lake National Forest or whatever national forest we might have, the Cache or the Wasatch, there's 100 sportsmen that utilize that forest for a different purpose, for hunting and recreation and outdoor activity. We're allies, we're natural allies, because I'm convinced that these radical environmental groups and NGOs that are trying to push the livestock off from the public lands, as soon as they have accomplished that goal, they'll be after hunting. They will not want to allow hunting on public lands, and I think we're starting to see some of that already in areas, on wildlife management areas in the state of Alaska. I was reading some articles just recently where the feds are coming in and wanting to take over management of those wildlife areas that have always been under the control of the state. But I think there's some great things that Greg has done, and I just want to give some accolades to Greg. I think Greg is one of the best wildlife directors that we've had in the 50 years I've been involved with public lands and wildlife issues in the state. And he comes from a background that's really not, he's not a biologist. I don't know how many of you know that. He's a numbers guy. And he was kind of the CFO for the department up there, the chief financial officer. But he had a good idea of what the feel of the public was. And I think that's what makes him a great leader. He understands Utah. He was born and raised here. He understands our customs and our culture. And I think he's made some tremendous strides in trying to bring us together. One of the things that I have been involved in recent years, Greg asked, at his invitation, I sat on the Utah Prairie Dog Working Group. Many of you know that a group down in Cedar City sued the federal government and prevailed in a lawsuit there. It's under appeal now, I think. Is it still under appeal, Greg? But basically, the state took over management of the prairie dogs on private lands. And we put together a working group, and I was just kind of an ad hoc member, but all different stakeholders come together, and I have seen some tremendous things come to pass in just the last year and a half. now that that prairie dog is under state jurisdiction versus where it was under federal jurisdiction prior to that lawsuit, or that ruling in that lawsuit. On my own personal farm, I had a pretty good-sized colony of prairie dogs, and I just never did, I hate to say this, but I never did trust the division coming and trapping those prairie dogs. They'd come and ask me if they could trap them. I'd say, no, just give me a permit to shoot them. I don't want you on here. I don't want you. But I think you all know the feeling, you know. But last year, Jessica, I got to know Jessica a little bit through this working group, and I says, Jessica, send your people over and trap those prairie dogs. You know what? I think they got every one. I think they got them all. And that's something that would never happen under the preview of the Federal Fish and Wildlife Service. And Greg's making, he and the department, I think, are making great strides, along with the board, in trying to reach out to private landowners and establish relationships and help us to help one another wherever we can. You know, I was only going to take a couple of minutes, and my time is probably already up, but one of the good things that I've seen come out of Washington in the last week, and very few good things come out of Washington. But one of the things that I was impressed with was when Justice Scalia passed away, Justice Ginsburg came out. How many of you saw her remarks? Now here you have a guy that's probably as far on the right spectrum, conservative, as there is in the court, and a lady that's probably as far on the opposite side. And yet her remarks were nothing but flattering of Judge Scalia, or Justice Scalia. And she said that he made her a better justice. She knew that if she was writing an opinion or a dissenting opinion, that he was going to be reading it. And she knew that he had just as much love for the Constitution as she thought she did. And even though that they disagreed by a wide margin in their philosophies of where we ought to go with the Constitution, they remained friends. They didn't let this come between their friendship. In fact, they socialized. They both loved opera. They took their spouses and went to the opera quite regularly. They traveled together. And I bring that up because what we see in Washington now is just this polarization of, you know, the good guys and the bad guys. There's nothing in between. I thought it was remarkable of Justice Ginsburg, even though I don't believe in hardly anything she ever says or writes, to come out and reach that hand out and show that there is room, that we can still be friends and have differing opinions on things. And I think we need to bring that same type of fever into this group. You know, there's groups out there that have opinions that are so far from mine and yours on where we ought to be going with these things. We do need to learn to listen to them, and we need to respect that opinion, and they need to learn to respect our opinion. And the place is not to stand up and fight these battles, is really not in, you know, a wildlife management area in Oregon or out on the range. It's at the ballot box. How many of you, just by show of hands, how many of you have ever commented when the government comes out for public comments on federal regulations that they're looking of adopting? Randy has as part of his job. There's few, not very many. You know, and I hadn't, until I got involved in politics, I hadn't. But now I watch that Federal Register pretty closely. And even if it's just Tom Hatch, a citizen, I send him a brief note telling him what I think. And we need more and more people to do that. We're not as organized as these NGOs and these groups that we're doing battle with. We don't have the funding. They have people that are doing that full time for them. But we can do it. All you have to do is watch the Federal Register, make comments, talk to your elected officials, hold their feet to the fire. I still think this is a battle that we can win. You know, I looked at the program this morning. It says addressing uncertainty, and I told these guys I was sitting with down here, I said, I don't know if I'm more uncertain now than I was when I came here, but I commend the Farm Bureau and the Public Lands Office and others who have made this conference possible. It's, you know, we've got to do it together. We can't just do it individually and in our small little groups. It's going to take organizations. We're going to have to step up to the plate. We might have to part of some money and put our money where our mouth is sometimes to make these things happen. It's not going to happen by itself. We are in the minority. But keep up the fight. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you this morning, and I appreciate the opportunity I've had to serve the people of this great state and in the various capacities that I have, and I thank you.
I lost my next slide. There we go. While he's finding that, you know, we're talking about maps and politics, and how do we get people to learn what our thoughts and ideas are out here? Some of the county commissioners, I haven't seen everybody who's here today. I can't see you even all now, but last weekend up in Salt Lake, Donald Trump Jr. spent 5 days in Utah. And part of that time he spent out trying to learn about these Western land issues. Because it's something that not a lot of these politicians really have much of an understanding of. They hear it. I think Hillary Clinton was in Elko the other day, and I think her comment was, when she asked, you know, where are we at on public lands, I think the response was something to the effect of, you know, those are just issues, you know, that a fringe group are worried about. And I don't think that went over well, even to her audience in Elko, which was obviously a kind of a staged group for her benefit. But I certainly did appreciate Donald Trump Jr. coming out, spending time driving around the state, learning what's going on, meeting with county commissioners Saturday evening and others. And I'm sure, I know some of you that are in the audience today were able to meet with him. And hopefully they're learning and taking that back and getting some wisdom. Few things, you know, often I think the ranching community says, you know, we do a lot for you wildlife, and you don't even realize it. And you don't thank us for it, and we're not really acknowledged for that. But some of the areas that I want you to know we do appreciate and acknowledge, you know, water on private and public lands. You know, you take care of that water, and the wildlife uses it, and we know it and appreciate it. Tolerating wildlife on your private lands to the extent possible. You know, I think most of you are good stewards of the land here. That's why you're here today, because you believe in that. And when your land is being managed properly, for some magical reason, the wildlife all gravitates to it because they realize the good work that you're doing. And I think that most of you are pretty tolerant of that to a point. You like seeing wildlife like we all do. When you have, you know, 300 deer in your field, or, you know, elk or whatever, you may not be as tolerant. But we do realize that, you know, you all stretch a long way to help our wildlife out. Fence repairs. You know, we know there's damages by wildlife and fencing that are out there and not being acknowledged for that work. Poachers and others, you know, you live in these rural areas, and you know when there's a vehicle driving down one of your roads that doesn't look right and it's not familiar, and if you see a spotlight hit the hill, you know, something's wrong there. And so you're on the ground helping our wildlife by working with law enforcement. Allowing access to public and private lands for hunters to help us keep our wildlife populations under control. Rangeland restoration. You know, a lot of you do work on your private ground, restoration work, and sometimes, quite often, the wildlife jump right in on that, and we realize that. Participating as licensed blind sportsmen. You know, I think probably there's few people in this room who haven't had a hunting or fishing license at some point in their time, and that helps us be successful. And helping us do wildlife counts to assess conditions. I mentioned counting horses the other day. we just counted elk here in this area we're in this kind of southern Utah complex we're in, end of January, first part of February. I think we had every helicopter rented from Oregon to New Mexico. I told our people, I said, we got good snow conditions, go fly all the elk that we can this winter. And they said, well, we have a routine and a schedule, and we just can't do it. I said, this is the winter, we got to do it. There's lots of controversy. How many elk do we have? Where are they at? So we went and we spent an extra $200,000. We found every helicopter and we flew it, and we invited, and you recognize a lot of the names here in any of these columns, but these are the folks, and this isn't statewide, this is just in the area we're sitting in right now, but we've been doing this all throughout the winter here, and we appreciate those of you. Many of you on this list are in the room today, and we appreciate your willingness to go up and maybe get a little bit airsick, but help us count these elk and help make sure that we have good numbers that we can all agree to. What else have we been trying to do to help? Finding and keep employees who understand the area conditions and who will stick around. You know, one thing I hear a lot, a frustration with some of these federal folks that come in is they come in for a year or two and then they're gone. And they don't have the time and the experience to really understand what you're up against and what you're dealing with. And they don't have that framework of 10 or 20 or 30 or 50 years. You know, we're trying to keep good employees that live in your communities, that know you, and they'll stick around. And they'll be here for 10 and 20 and 30 years with you, so they can evolve on these landscapes with you. Flying elk, we just talked about that. Bighorn sheep, sage-grouse, prairie dogs, bison. You know, all of these have caused challenges in the grazing community. Bighorn sheep, I mentioned a little earlier, in the Uintas. It's causing some problems with the forest as they do a viability assessment up there. And I think we just heard some good news for the wool growers that are here. If there's any wool growers from the Uintas, I think the Forest Service is going to come out very favorably on some assessments they're doing there. And you know, I think we were happy to partner with the wool growers, Tanya Fuller and others that might be here, to help explain how we're trying to alleviate those problems and help the Forest Service. Again, try to have a cooperative partnership, and I think we're going to end up in a good place there for the wildlife and for the grazers. Lethally removing problem wildlife. I think we're killing more animals now than we have in a whole long time on these grounds. And sometimes it's just time for these animals to go. We try and try and try, and they don't get it, and ultimately we have to remove some of those. But we're doing a fair amount of that now, I could tell you that. And I've done some of that on I've been down and with Kevin and I and others have been on site and done that. It's not a fun or pretty thing, but that's often what we have to do to get things back where they need to be. Our conservation officers work with your local sheriffs. We realize that the authority that these local sheriffs have, and we're there and backing them up. And I think the sheriffs that are here today, at least I hope they would acknowledge that we're there and willing to help whenever we can, and they're doing that. General Deer Landowner Appreciation Permits. This is an item that was brought to us by the Farm Bureau. A lot of smaller ranchers came in and said, we don't mind some deer in our fields, but we're frustrated because we can't get a deer permit anymore. Everybody wants these tags. So we came in and the Farm Bureau said, what if somebody had 320 acres? Could you get them a deer tag every year if this is an area where we're getting a lot of heavy use by deer? And we said, let's look into that. We did it. We did it, Randy, to 100 acres, okay? Not 320, but down to 100 acres if you've got frequent deer use on your properties, that you can come in and don't have to get that tag through the draw. You can come into our office and do that. So we're trying to, again, help acknowledge those of you who are helping wildlife. Increase cougar and bear permit numbers. Those have both gone up in the last few years. Extended, and our bears have grown some, and we significantly increased our bear permit numbers last year. Extended cougar permits for livestock loss areas. We took a rule through our wildlife board, our RACs and wildlife board, that says if we got a chronic area that just keeps getting pounded by cougars, let's give landowners a tag that's not good for 72 hours like we've had in the past, that's good for up to 6 months. So let them try to get those cougars in a way and in time and a place that they can. And that's been taken advantage of in the last year or so. ESA issues, sage grouse. We've worked hard on the sage grouse thing to not have a listing. Some people, a lot of people here are very frustrated with some of the federal plans that came in. And I've heard the statement, we would have been better to have the thing listed than these new forest plans. But I can tell you, any of you here who have deeded land that has sage grouse on it did not want to have an endangered species listed on your deeded property. You know, that is not a good state of being, you know, ask the prairie dog folks who are here how that goes. So, so we've worked hard to prevent a listing. Increasing the ranges for depredation that you can remove animals if we give out permits. CWMUs, landowner associations, you know, have helped a lot of our landowners. A new elk plan that we've dropped. You know, we used to have our last elk plan. It's been around forever. And it said, here's how many elk we want in the state of Utah. And it was a number. And we've taken that out altogether. On that plan, we had members of the Farm Bureau and others, several members that helped us on that plan. We said, we're dropping this cap thing for how many elk need to be in Utah. We will look at elk on a case-by-case basis around the state. Whenever that we develop that might be the number, but we're not striving to hit 80,000, 100,000, 60,000, whatever. And so I think that will be helpful. We've come up this year, and it'll be for this fall, private land only elk permits. So instead of these elk tags that are just in a drawing, and maybe they come to private land, maybe they go on public land, we want to have tags that are easier to buy, maybe even over the counter, but they're only good on private lands, so that maybe you can sell those, maybe you can use them yourself, but permits that will help push and haze these animals off these private lands back onto the public lands. A couple other things. Supporting grazing on public lands even increases as forage continue to increase. You know, we've done over 1 million acres of watershed. We believe at some point here that our federal partners need to start looking hard at increasing some of these allotments based on all this forage, because we're creating a lot of food out there. Something needs to be out there eating that. Working to achieve better research. You know, we're collaring elk all over the state. What are these things doing? Where are they going? So that we can have the best management plans. Trying to keep our wildlife at their herd objectives. Continuing to find solutions for private land conflicts. Holding federal agencies accountable for wild horse issues. Working to provide counts as we're doing surveys that I talked about. Trying to remove animals and get state control. We really believe we can manage wild horses and burros in the state, and we've got Congressman Stewart's working in Washington. We'd like to have a test pilot run to show that we can manage wild horses and burros in the state, still protect that species, but be able to get past some of the challenges and hurdles that the BLM deals with. I think Jenna would be up there cheering for that one if she heard that, but I think we can do it, and we're going to keep pushing to get state authority on those. Continue predator control and hunters around the state. Wildlife services, I mentioned earlier, we give them a lot of money and a lot of functional support. Not growing wildlife populations on private landowners, providing materials to make our programs easier. I think there's some handouts in that folder you got this morning. Localized working groups for elk, sage grouse, and others is new. Keeping good employees on the ground, working with the sheep producers to resolve conflicts that I think we've been successfully doing, actually. Depredation payments, fixing fences, fencing haystacks, hazing animals, trapping turkeys, control permits, all of those things that you're familiar with. Here's where you can help us, and then I'll be done here. Continue management in the public process within DWR, the state and national levels. You know, Tom just got up and said, give feedback to federal agencies. Believe it or not, they do look at that. And I could tell you, our public process does work. Our RACT process for wildlife management, our board process, it does work. These are people, they're here today to hear what you've got to say. They're at those meetings, and these are real guys that understand these landscapes, and they're listening to you. Don't disengage from our public process and think there's a better way to get it done. Work with us, and we'll work with you. Protect, you know, if you haven't heard in Colorado, there's a ballot initiative out there to end trapping and hunting with hounds for cougars and bears in the state of Colorado. I don't know what's going to happen. Remember when I showed those circles earlier about states that have demographics that may not always align or understand what we're doing? There's a good chance that will pass, and I'll tell you, they're going to be in tough shape in Colorado if they lose those tools. And believe me, we just did our cougar plan, and the anger and hatred that was shot our way, even for hunting cougars, at all, let alone at good management levels. So help us with that. Predators with dogs is one that's under kind of some national assault, hound dogs and things. Allowing access to on your properties, if you can let our hunters get through your property to kill some of those animals, that helps us. Equal Opportunity for Justice Act. You know, you're familiar with that. I think that's a law that, you know, when these groups sue the feds and win, they get a lot of money, and that money comes right back to fighting what we're trying to accomplish here. Supporting officials that support hunting and fishing. I don't know if you saw in the news, 2 weeks ago, the last commissioner in the state of California, who's an avid hunter and fisherman, or a board member, as we'd call him here in Utah, resigned and said, I can't do this anymore. This entire wildlife commission in the state of California has turned into purely environmentalists. That's who's been appointed. Those commissioners have been publicly harassed and hazed and asked to resign for hunting cougars legally, for hunting chukar birds legally. And he resigned and said it's unfortunate that now we don't have any hunters and fishermen left on the California Wildlife Commission, particularly when you consider that the funding that our organization's run by is primarily hunter and angler dollars. So support our folks who are trying to support you. And lastly, standing together as we agree that it's not should we have livestock or wildlife on public lands, but rather can we manage the range so we can have both a viable livestock community and viable wildlife population. So with that, I'll wrap up. I hope I'm not over time, but thank you all.